So hi Riri, thanks for joining me in today's podcast. So you're one of the people that I think I really got to know a lot more during the quarantine since you spent like about a month here at home with us. And I think we never really got to hang out officially or this much until now. And especially during this time, right, when everyone is so isolated and stuck at home, it's really great to have someone to have these kinds of conversations with face to face. And I'd like to talk a bit more about that. So during this time, I think we dealt with a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. And I just wanted to know a bit more about your experience and how maybe things like mindfulness and meditation helped you during this process.
I think for all of us, um, we had certain plans before the quarantine that obviously didn't push through. So for me, it was actually weird because I was already in a transition phase, sort of even before the quarantine, because I was gonna be living alone for the first time in my life. So at the time, I was already, I used that as a motivation to kind of do whatever I want because I was already living alone. So that's when I made all these plans to just, chase my dreams or whatever. Like I really went for that whole go for your dreams thing. So yeah, so it was really wild because I was already, ready to start kind of a new life before quarantine. So no, yeah. So I actually just finished school late last year. So I was about to start school again. Like I wanted to study again. This time I wanted to pursue film because that was the dream that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, I enrolled myself to a film school in the States, and I also I already planned the whole year actually that I was gonna be in the States. So I had all these plans, all these tickets bought, like all the places I was gonna go to. That was the initial plan supposedly, like just kind of study again.
That's interesting. I think everyone really had a lot of plans before the quarantine. So if for you it was like pursuing your dream and going abroad and studying and all those things. I think for me it wasn't like I had like a 10-year plan ahead of me at the time, but I think at least I saw what was gonna like how things are going to unfold the upcoming year. So that was just I guess me getting a promotion, what else? Like planning a lot of different trips and all of that. So I think it really was normal for a lot of people to kind of feel, I guess, a bit anxious about everything because we all made these kinds of plans, right? But nothing really worked out or panned out, especially this year. With all the plans that you mentioned earlier, what were the big changes that happened then when COVID happened, when this quarantine situation happened?
So obviously everything, everything didn't happen is what happened. First of all, my bags were already packed. But yeah, because my flights were canceled like 2 weeks before I was about to fly. So it was really like rattling for me because I already had everything planned out, and then suddenly, like just the fact that you can't leave the country just cancels out everything. So yeah, like that was really difficult for me because yeah, like I mentioned, I just finished school. So I was about to enter this whole new career that, I had no experience in. Like I was just about to learn supposedly. But then that didn't happen for me.
So how did all these changes then make you feel?
Actually, speaking of change, before the quarantine, um, I ended the year pretty rough last year. So I lost my mom at the end of the year. So that's why I mentioned that I was living alone for the first time. So that in itself was already such a big change for me. So then having COVID happen, I was really like grieving multiple losses. Like so apart from my mom, there were all these plans. And it was so hard because all these plans were actually the ones, that kept me going. It was the only thing I was looking forward to because, I felt like it was even meant to be that okay, I lost my mom. It means that, it's my time to like focus on myself now and do what I want. And like I went like all out with all my plans and everything. But then yeah, COVID happened. So it was really hard because I felt like I was doing everything wrong or like, because everything was just not pulling through for me. And I guess that's really what pushed me to accept that I really can't control anything. Like even if I plan it out so specifically, like even if I have it like out in bullet points or whatever, like it's really not gonna be under my control. So yeah.
And I guess like with all of these things going out of your control or spiraling out of your control, I've been with you here, I think, for the past month, and I guess in a way I did see the struggle or how difficult that was. And I think even though the things we're grieving for were quite different, um, maybe I also felt the same things but in a different way. So I can't only imagine what it's like to feel the loss of someone so important to you. But I think I did lose a couple of things that were important to me too. If for you it was your mom and your plans, your career, I think for me it was losing like important relationships. It was losing um it was a death also, but a different kind of experience. I also did feel some sort of loss in terms of career because I started realizing that I didn't know if this is what I also wanted to pursue. So in a lot of ways, I think I also did experience that kind of grief, and it was great as I mentioned earlier how we were able to in a way experience this together like in person. I mean, I won't say that it was the same, right? But just having someone or knowing that someone is also going through the same thing can help you move forward, I guess, in a way.
I think it's also challenging, like to face grief now because it's such a unique time. Like the common way of dealing with grief is supposed to be, like going out, seeing your friends, and just, doing whatever you love to do, to the beach. But then now it's like you can't do any of these things. We're really forced to just sit with our thoughts, and I think that's what really builds more authentic relationships. The fact that you're kind of forced to, just talk about it and to really deal with it. And yeah, like for me it was so hard because it was so fresh. My mom was suffering for 3 years, so for us, like for everybody, it was a difficult time. Like those past 3 years were really difficult. So I really thought, like this year was gonna be the year that, now that at least my mom is like really from all the pain and suffering, for us too, like pretty sure it's a weight off, like we get to move on with our lives. But then this whole pandemic happened, so then it really goes to show that even in the weirdest times, like things can really begin to change, and you have to learn to cope with them.
That's true. Like now that you talk about coping, I think because I did experience a couple of the changes also earlier on before the whole quarantine happened. Like my goal was to go out as much as possible. I'd barely go home. I'd hang out all the time with friends. Like I was spending so much, I realized, on different things that I thought would bring me joy also.
Yeah.
Like whether that be going out for drinks with your friends in a party, but not really talking about how you feel.
Yeah.
Whether that be planning spontaneous trips anywhere and everywhere just to get your mind off of things. I think the quarantine really forces you to kind of sit down and just like listen to what you're feeling, right? It's not all that like perfect. It's not, you start realizing that maybe the ways of coping has to be different.
Yeah.
And I think with that we started doing different things as well. So if initially like our plans were to like fly out, do different things, go on trips and study and meet all these different people. I think one thing that we both did in common was meditate. And how was that experience like for you?
Actually, I first started meditation. It wasn't even for this yet. It was when I really had a hard time falling asleep. Like it was those days when I even felt like I was already going through like prolonged grief disorder, because I really felt that I wasn't getting any better, and I felt like people around me were already moving on with their lives. So then, I started to think if there was something wrong with me or something, because I really couldn't fall asleep. Like the first few months after my mom passed, especially because after my mom passed, that's when I started making plans, right? So I really felt like I was okay, like I was ready to move on. But then when this happened, that was the only time I realized that I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't as okay as I thought I was, because like I couldn't fall asleep. It was so much harder than I thought it would be, mostly because it used to just be me and my mom. My mom was a single mom, by the way, so it just used to be like me and her at the house. So not having her around was extra difficult. And so I decided to meditate, because usually it's what helps you wind down and kind of just rest. So that's where it started for me. And then afterwards, I guess I just realized, like while exploring the app I was using, that it tackles so many different things that you think you're suffering with or that you have a problem with. So that was very fascinating to me, because then I really learned that if you can control your mind in some level, you can do anything. So I was able to tackle like so many different things that I was struggling with, like apart from insomnia, like even the simplest things that we didn't even think could be fixed. Like let's say like how you focus, or like how you set your intentions, or how you prioritize things, like all these things you can actually learn from just meditation. So yeah, I think that's how it started for me.
Actually, I started getting into meditation like not even now, like a few years back. So I think it was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was the kind of girl who liked doing a lot of things. Like I'd get super busy, um, join different organizations, different projects, study hard, and all of that. Until it kind of reached this point where I got burnt out. And the next thing that for you to do is to usually run for a certain position. But at the time, I was really burnt out, and I didn't like none of the positions made sense to me. I didn't feel like running because it wasn't my kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I told myself, you know what? I'm just gonna take a break, study abroad, and not care about anything. Like I'm just gonna leave and like have fun and do all of these things. And the 4 months that I spent abroad was really great, especially because I got to meet so many refreshing people and minds who were living a life that was so different from mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I really did enjoy like all those months. But I think the biggest problem was when I came back. After seeing, I think overall that was so different from yours, and coming back to a reality that exists, and a reality that you have to live in. Because I didn't have any plans, I came back where everyone had their own plans. Like people were running for positions, people were applying for these different internships, and I guess that just kind of shook me because I didn't know who these people were anymore. Everything felt so foreign to me, and I just didn't know what to do next. And I feel like I just had this sort of existential crisis where I started asking myself, like, who am I without this, like, work? Like, who am I without work? Who am I without academics? I think that was what made it really difficult for me during those times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, I think it was just out of desperation, actually, that I got into meditation during the time.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, like, it really did help me, like what you mentioned earlier. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I wouldn't say that doing it healed me completely, but it was a good tool, I think, to help me understand my emotions a lot better. So I think, like, even though we know how meditation is something that's very beneficial to us, there are really a lot of biases, I think, and perceptions towards meditation, which is why a lot of people don't want to try doing it. And would you say that you had certain perceptions towards it also before?
Yeah, for sure. Like the way I meditated before was so wrong. Because I don't know, like when you just sit there by yourself and with your eyes closed and everything, I always wonder, it's like, what are we supposed to be thinking? Like, are we just supposed to think of a blank space, or are we supposed to think happy thoughts? But yeah, so it's funny because when I started out, I'd always imagined myself like on top of a rock, on like a waterfall, and it's like birds everywhere, and it's just like super calm. I always pictured it that way because it gave me so much peace. And for a while it worked. But then, yeah, like soon enough, I learned that that isn't how you're supposed to go about it. Like, I guess a misconception rather, would be that, when you meditate, you veer away from reality and kind of just step into this zone that's more happy or like more perfect, and you forget your worries and just think happy thoughts. I think that's how most people look at it, or how they think it works. But in fact, it's not. Like I learned that it's actually the opposite. Like you're not supposed to step away from the world when you're meditating. In fact, you're supposed to indulge in it even more, because it's learning to be aware of what's around you. Ironically, even if your eyes are closed, you're supposed to be aware of what's around you, the sensations that you're feeling. And I think that in itself is really important, because that's how you should tackle your problems. You're not supposed to run away from them. You're not supposed to have some time in your day where you just escape reality and focus on happy thoughts, because that's not how life works. You can't just press click the switch. What do you do with the switch?
Yeah,
turn the switch.
on the switch.
Unlike from like having all these problems to suddenly everything's like solved. Yeah, so from the old misconception of just thinking positive things and transitioning into being more aware instead. Just breathing is already a reminder that, you know, your breath is always different from the last. So it's already reminding you of like impermanence. From sitting down to standing up, or like just feeling your feet on the ground and what that feels like. Just being aware of how you feel is very life-changing to me, because then, yeah, like it's just something you carry with you every day as a reminder that, you know, everything is constantly changing and that it's not just you. Like being aware also reminds you that you're never alone. Like everybody is going through the same thing as you, especially now, like with the pandemic, being more aware of it and realizing how you're not the only one who's, you know, grieving these losses. Some are obviously having it a lot worse, and just kind of having that thought that you're not alone makes such a big impact, because then, you know, you feel a sense of community.
It's interesting how that also, I guess, translates to things like in everyday life. So, you know how we experience or go through different things, different mannerisms, different habits that we don't realize have become a part of us. We tend to forget, for example, or we tend not to notice like how we deal with our friends, or how we talk to our parents, or how we, you know, do our work. Yeah. So these are things I think that are really big, but you don't really notice in the everyday scheme of things. So I think noticing like these tiny movements, I think, in yourself when you meditate, when you just listen to your body and to your breath, can also translate to the bigger things. And it was interesting how you said earlier, for example, that your perception of meditation was, you know, sitting in a rock and like feeling like all the birds and the sky and all of that. And I think it was very similar to me, but in a different sense. So I guess to me, I thought that meditation was something that was very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was something that only monks would do in like Tibet or something. I don't know, in their temples praying. Like that's how I saw it. It was like this feeling of nirvana. So it seemed like a very far-fetched reality, although it is rooted from a religious practice. And I wouldn't say it's very religious, like it or it's attached to a certain religion in that sense, because I think it's something that can be applied to anybody, like absolutely everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also in a way, it requires some sort of faith, right? And I guess when I mean faith or spirituality, it's not like believing it's not about like believing in a god or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more of having that faith in words and in yourself, because we usually look for material things, I think, to guide us. We need to see like money come in to know that we're getting results and stuff like that. But there's so much faith, I think, that requires to just sit down and listen to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that also made me afraid to do it was because I knew the kind of thoughts that would come in my head, and I knew they weren't good thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or not all of them would be good thoughts. So just sitting down, I think, and listening to yourself and like really facing those thoughts is like really scary, right? Like we know how bad it is already on a normal day, and just the thought of sitting down and saying, okay, I'm gonna let these thoughts come and go is a really scary thing. And I think that's also one thing that kind of changes or like makes people afraid to try it out.
In some level, it might feel counterintuitive, because, you know, when you're feeling all these things, you want to heal from them. So to like dwell on them and, you know, to spend so much time thinking about it kind of feels like you're actually doing the opposite. And I think that's very interesting, because like for me personally, when I was going through my grief for my mom, you know, it was really hard, because I didn't know like when was the pain gonna stop. Like, you know, every time I meditate, like I end up just constantly crying like every single day. So I was like, when do I actually know that I'm getting better? Because in meditation, there's no actual meter that will, you know, tell you that, okay, today you're like on this level, so tomorrow you're gonna be like this much better. Like, it doesn't work that way. So I guess that's when the faith comes in, as you were saying. It's really trusting that you will get better, even if you don't see it like physically, like there's no tangible results to what you're doing. But I think, like going back to how I said that the mind is so powerful, I think that's really what makes meditation so fascinating. Just the fact that you and your mind alone can do so many things.
I guess like now that you've been meditating for quite a while, how would you say your perception is different now versus back then?
So as I mentioned, like before, I saw it as, you know, a way of seeing the silver lining in life all the time. I guess now what really changed is that it became more of a self-care thing for me, like learning to be kinder to myself, because it's not, because it's not always, there's not always a silver lining, it's not always positive things happening in life. So in these moments, like, what do you just do you just give up, do you just kind of drown in your sorrows, like what are you supposed to do? So now how I see meditation, it's not like an automatic way to solve these problems, but rather it's really just learning to kind of step away from those things, from those negative emotions or thoughts, and really seeing them more with with composure and with clarity, and really evaluating why you're feeling that emotion, or why this thing is happening in your life. And that in itself isn't like, it won't solve your problem. It won't be like, oh, so this is why I feel this, now I feel better. Like, that's not how it works. But then just being able to step away and see yourself the way I see, like I visualize myself, especially like, let's say when I'm really going through all these sporadic emotions and getting overwhelmed by them, I just kind of imagine myself like outside myself, and I just let her like calm down and then really just see it with clarity more, like the root of what I'm feeling is, and what approach I can do. And that's the really fascinating thing about meditation too, is that every day you realize a new approach. There's always like, there's so many approaches to like all your problems. Before, I think that when we experience certain things again and again, you kind of think it's like, oh, it's toxic, maybe it's a toxic trait that I have. But now, like, these toxic traits are actually patterns that you can find a different approach to every single day to kind of improve as a person, to improve your life, your lifestyle. So yeah, so more of like a quick fix or an easy solution. I see meditation now as just my way of really just stepping back and seeing things with more clarity.
Okay, so I guess if for you it was, having that self-care routine for yourself and finding these like small but very effective long-term solutions to whatever it was you were feeling. I realized that it also has a very scientific approach that shows how it's really effective for you and for your body. What I really love, I think, about applications now versus like back then, where you'd really have to go, I don't know, maybe to a monk to experience it yourself, or through a workshop. I like how there are really simple techniques that can guide you, whether that be visualization or noting what you're feeling. These things are really accessible and available already to everyone. But I think more than that, it helped me see that there was such thing as an emotional and mental muscle. Everyone knows, right, that to run a marathon, like if you want to run a marathon next year, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to jog 5 times this year, and by next year I can run a marathon, right? It's not actually, like, things don't work that way. It's something that you have to build. It's a consistency that you do with it every day that allows you to become better and to finish or win that race. And I think it's the same for meditation, right? Or any mental practice in general, or mindfulness practice. In our mental or emotional state, we run to things only when we feel like we have no choice. So for example, people go see therapists, people go try meditation, people start talking to their friends only when they feel like they're getting an emotional equivalent of a stroke or a heart attack. Like, we wait for these really, really bad moments to happen in our life before we try to do something about it. But meditation helped me realize that it's about like the small things you do every day. You have to do these little things that can help build your emotional or mental muscle, so that when the time that something big or something challenging comes your way, you're able to deal with things better. So I think meditation is something that is preventive. Mm-hmm. It's more of a preventive measure than it is a cure. And I think that's what I really like about it also.
Yeah, actually, since you said that, I realized also, I was saying that meditation helped me in a lot of areas or times where I felt, like difficulty, or like, a lot of trials and all these things. But yeah, actually meditation is not just for like when you're feeling all those negative things. In fact, it's also for when you don't. Like, I really like how meditation reminds you not just to be aware of when you're feeling sad, but also when it stops. And I think that's so important, because we don't acknowledge that. Like, when we're crying, or when we're super sad, obviously we feel it. But then when we stop crying and we stop being sad, we don't actually like rejoice, oh, I'm not sad anymore. Like, we don't acknowledge it. And it's so powerful, I think, to acknowledge that moment, because then you really realize that, no feeling is final and everything is constantly changing. Like, I think, if anything, meditation is really all about like teaching you impermanence, and impermanence not just of like sad times, but even happy times, that they don't last forever. So the more you really get to cherish them.
You know how in meditation they always talk about like the blue sky, right?
Yeah.
Like how there are gonna be like big dark gray clouds and storms, and then other days it's gonna be really sunny and bright. These things always change. The weather always changes, but at the end of the day, the blue sky will always be there, and that's something that you have to take note of or remember,
Right.
even during very turbulent moments in your life.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think then that meditating will help you also in the future?
I think it will help me in a sense that I'll be able to react less impulsively when I encounter different situations in my life. Because I guess I noticed that that's one thing that, I need to work on. Because every time, I feel something, usually I really let it get the best of me. Like a lot of people know that I'm really like matter over mind or something. But yeah, as I continue to meditate, I'm really working on being less reactive. And I think that that's applicable to so many different situations that could happen to me, like in the long term or like in the future. Yeah, and once I learn to become less reactive, I think it's gonna ripple to, really improving even the relationships that I have, because I'll be able to step back and observe and really evaluate how I feel and how I treat others, so that I also build healthier relationships. Apart from that, also, as I continue to meditate, it really teaches you the value of slowing down and always, just being aware of the breath and going back to it. So whatever you're feeling, there's always something that you can go back to, and to remind yourself that it's okay. You don't have to always constantly be moving. I think that's also another thing that I was struggling with, with the transition because of COVID. I felt like I had to be doing something because everybody was doing something. But yeah, you learn as you go on that there is no specific timeline to follow. It's really what you make it. The more I become less reactive to how others are also going about their lives, I get to improve the quality of my own life as well.
Yeah, I think people often forget to slow down. Like they take things for granted more often than not. And meditation is a really good reminder for you to just take a step back, be grateful or cherish every moment, be more aware of the present moment, because we're often so fixated on our past, or we're always looking forward to the future, but we forget to sit down and be present. I feel like now I'm better equipped with the tools that can help me when more difficult or challenging moments come. I mean, I know that I will definitely still feel something, it's inevitable, but now I have the tools to help me get through moments like that.
I definitely feel that I'm in a much better headspace than I was before. Because yeah, like when I was living alone, the start of the lockdowns, I was quarantined by myself for over a month. It was really bad. Like I feel like it was a very low point. And when I started meditating, I was starting out, yeah, like I was really feeling like I was in this rut, just trying to figure out when I'm gonna get out of it. But then now, mentally and emotionally, I think I feel a lot healthier. I'm also able to relate with people better now, because I guess also before, I had this some sort of bitterness because all these things happened to me. Like I lost my mom and then all of my plans, and I feel like the world was against me or something. But then the beauty of meditation, as I mentioned also, is it gives you that sense of community and really just reminds you that you're not alone. In fact, you're just a speck of dust in this world, which is so amazing because yeah, like you get to really connect with other people. And at the end of the day, I guess that's all we really need, just to have those authentic relationships with people. Yeah, so I can't for sure say that I'm like 100% better, but just to be in a better headspace, I think is so important, because then now you can really approach your days differently. If it doesn't work, you can always try something new again. It's not just some trend or some fad that makes you feel better. It's not just like a generational thing or something. It's really a foundation that I think is very relevant and overlooked. Yeah, like meditation doesn't just stop at home. you know.
You start seeing, I think, the small effects eventually in your day-to-day life. I guess for me, it was noticing all of a sudden how I'd respond to certain people. Like I'd normally just say a certain remark or a certain reaction. But I think being able to meditate makes me think first. before I say something. It makes me be more aware of how I respond to things. It makes me more aware of how I pick things up or I submit some sort of thing, how I message a person, and it really does like those wonders. And like what you mentioned earlier, right? It's the little things that make the biggest changes, I think, or the biggest difference in people's lives. And I love how meditation allows you to do that or to be that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, because it doesn't pressure you or invalidate anything that you're feeling. Like there's even some meditation practices that helps you acknowledge, those bad thoughts that we have in our head, and just normalizes it, makes you really feel like you're normal and that everybody is going through the same thing as you, on different levels perhaps. But I think just having that space where you can really just be yourself and allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, to take as much time as you want. I think that's the only way to really go about, the difficult things that you're going through.
Thanks for joining me in today's podcast. I think it was really great to have someone to talk to about meditation since not a lot of people are into it yet. And I hope that this conversation allows more people to try the space and maybe get into this peaceful community.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to, all the authentic experiences that we'll hear from the rest of your podcast. I think now is really the perfect time to acknowledge all of these things, so that, we really feel that we're all connected to one another. Because I guess now more than ever, we're prone to feeling like we're alone.